All right. Good evening and welcome to the latest episode of Neck Up Live. My name is Jeff Ramey with my co-host Eugene Collins, and we have the pleasure of interviewing tonight Larry Hisle. Larry Hisle is a 1965 graduate of Portsmouth High School, and in 1965 he was the 38th selection in the Major League Baseball draft, where he would go on to play 14 seasons in the major leagues with the Phillies, Twins, and Brewers. He went on to coach in the major leagues with the Toronto Blue Jays, where he won 2 World Series rings back-to-back in 1992 and 1993. And he is currently employed by the Brewers as the manager of youth outreach, and he is also the president of Major League Mentoring in the city of Milwaukee. So welcome to the show, Larry.
Jeff, thank you so much, Eugene, for having me.
All right. So, Larry, I'm sorry, Eugene. I'm sorry.
You okay? I said welcome aboard, Larry.
Right.
Oh, thank you so much.
So, Larry, I always like to start out with the people that we interview from Portsmouth. Can you tell us a little bit what it was like growing up in Portsmouth, and also maybe some people who had the biggest influence on you?
Please forgive me for smiling from ear to ear, but anytime I hear the word Portsmouth, it conjures up so many memories that are beneficial to me that without living there, not one of my dreams would have been realized. I credit Portsmouth for more of my success than I give myself. And I truly and sincerely mean that. Every aspect of succeeding athletically, we were given growing up in Portsmouth. Great facilities to work and practice on, outstanding coaches. I remember a lot of coaches. We had great coaches even in grade school. Young man, your father, Mr. Collins, was one of my coaches. So it started early. But I think at the top of the list was the competition that was every day a part of our lives. People would always ask, growing up, how many camps did you attend? Not one official, but I attended the best unofficial camp in the entire world. That camp at Bannon Park, where when I would go out to practice, Mike Hisle, Osier Carter, Deke Malone, players that competed at that high school level when I was watching that were the absolute best. And I can remember my first time being chosen to play in a game with them. I was chosen not because I was good, but because they needed another player. There was no more out there. And I realized then that I'm competing against as good a player as we have in the state. And if by some way, through hard work and effort and dedication, I can compete against them, then I know I have a chance to compete against the people that are my age. So Portsmouth has meant the world to me. You know, man, at the top of the list, when I started to play Major League Baseball, the first question, and the question asked the most, who were your heroes? And invariably, they looking for a baseball player. I attended only 2 Major League games before playing. Baseball, I hate to admit, was second on my list to basketball in terms of loving it. So I didn't have any true baseball heroes. My hero is the person responsible for everything that I've accomplished. And I didn't get the privilege of spending a great deal of time with that person. And that was my mother. My mother passed away when I was 11. And she instilled in me a belief and a work ethic that was second to none. I always believe that it's important to find a purpose in life to drive us when things are tough and challenging. And my purpose was better than anyone's. My purpose, and this is the truth, I used to tell my son all the time and the kids I work with, my purpose and goal in life was to make my mother, who I felt is the most extraordinary human being ever to grace this earth, make my mother prouder of me than I am of her. And when things got difficult, practice is hard, I would think about my mother and work a little bit harder. Every good thing that's happened to me, honestly, she's responsible for. So forgive me for smiling so much when you talk about Portsmouth. I was truly blessed to be there, and know something, I still miss it.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Larry, you briefly touched on basketball, and you were a high school All-American. Could have went to, from what I understand, probably any school in the country you wanted to go to. Recruited by John Wooden. Is that true? So what?
Yes.
So you said it yourself. Your first love was basketball, and I've talked to Al Oliver before, who's a great basketball player, and he told me, he said, baseball chose me. I didn't choose baseball, which basically meant his first love was basketball. You both chose baseball, but why did you choose baseball when basketball was your first love?
When I was, growing up, and I tell the kids that follow your passion, but equally important, and in all honesty, I tell them more important, to realize what you're good at and work hard at that, and never push aside and disregard those skills. I love basketball with a passion. At an early age, I felt that my skill base directed me towards basketball. And one of the greatest joys of my life, when I entered the 7th grade, which was the first grade of middle school, where we competed with a lot more athletes, my 7th grade year in gym at McKinley Middle School, Coach G was the 8th grade coach, but also taught physical education. And we were practicing basketball before the tryouts. He said, Larry, I want you to stay after practice. And I'll never forget, I stayed after, and he said, I want you to shoot layups, jump shots. And he told me that I want you not to try out for the 7th grade team, but for the 8th grade team. I made that team, did well, but that put a spark in me that made me believe that with hard work and effort, I could compete with almost anyone my age. And that was the spark. At age 13, I remember watching television, and we were blessed to live in a state where both teams were battling for the NCAA championship, Ohio State and University of Cincinnati. And I don't know why, but that game, watching Ohio State, my dream was to play at Ohio State. And I practice religiously. I tell the kids that, and you tell my son, I can't watch all your practices, but I don't have to, because your performance next year will let me know how well you practice. And that was important for me. My goal was just to outwork everyone. And I was just so lucky and blessed with success in basketball that it kept me motivated. And, my senior year, talked about John Wooden. One of my greatest joys, I was recruited heavily by a lot of schools. I was so gracious to receive offers from. But Coach Heller made me go. I wasn't going to go. The University of Michigan invited players to visit. And I think it was like 6 or 7 players. And I didn't want to go. And I guess the coach from the University of Michigan asked Coach Heller as a favor to get me there. I went. It was truly one of the joys of my life. Every time I turn on TV and see a commercial, and I'll see Lou Alcindor, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar now perform, he was one of the players invited.
Wow.
Of those players invited, 4 played in the NBA. I didn't play, and there was another. There was Lucius Allen. I'm showing my age. I can't remember the players, but it was one of the best times of my life. And when I went back home, I felt that all that work and effort had paid off, because I'm now being judged by people that know the game as a person that takes this game extremely seriously.
Okay. Larry, was you in the was Portsmouth in the GOL when you played the Great Ohio League when you played?
It was Greater Ohio League, and my goodness, Eugene, my sophomore year, that Greater Ohio League was, well, it had the reputation of being clearly the best league in the state. And I remember reading about it. And when the season ended, I said, truly they were, without a question. Even the team that finished in last place, we knew we had our work cut out for us.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing about Coach Heller, and I look at it now, and I was grateful that he did. He scheduled the most challenging teams in the state for us to play against. And I felt it was great for us to be able to determine what we could do and how we could perform against the best. But also it was great for the fans. My sophomore year, my junior year, we played against both state championship teams. Sophomore year, Columbus East, and plus in that GOL, there were some outstanding teams. My junior year,
Froze up here a little bit.
Bros.
See if he comes back on here. There we go, Larry.
There you go.
Okay. So you were talking about your junior year.
Yes, my junior year, we competed against what I believe was not only the best basketball team that we played in against that year, but possibly one of the best basketball teams to ever play in Ohio, Dayton Belmont. Man, I'll never forget, they had a starting 5. They would let them rest and bring in another 5 players. I'll never forget when they brought them in, I said, oh, now we have a chance to make up some ground. But they were just as good.
Was Don May on that Belmont team?
He was. Don May, Hoskett, 2 players that went to the NBA.
Okay.
There were other players that received great Division I scholarships, and it was a battle. Eugene, I'll never forget, I used to work hard for offensive rebound. That was my thing. And that ball would go up. My first action was to beat my man and try to get in good position. And I'll never forget, against Dayton Belmont, a ball went up. They had a man in front of me and one on my side. And I told myself, I've got a battle tonight. I've got a battle on my hands. We lost, I think, by almost 20 points. But that was probably the closest anyone came to him. It was an honor to play against him, but certainly an unbelievable learning experience.
Wow. So you were able to play against Don May, and then was Jerry Lucas at Middletown when you played?
No, but his reputation was. So we, when he came when Middletown came to Portsmouth, he was the person that everyone talked about. And I remember there was a gentleman who grew up who was an outstanding athlete, Mr. Albert White.
Yeah.
And I guess Albert White watched him. And Albert would talk about he did the best job I think anyone's ever did against the gentleman. And I think he scored like 42 points against him. So,
Wow.
yeah, so it was Ohio. We were really blessed with not only great teams, but some of the greatest players to ever play the game. And man, I always felt that if I could play well in the state of Ohio, I could play at college and we could compete with any college in the state because in the country, because they did. Ohio State back then was as good as any college program that existed.
Was you say you played Columbus East? Would that have been Ed Ratliff and Mel No?
Oh my goodness, yes. That team, never in my life have I played against a team that did two things better. And I think I never will. And those two things were they played the best defense and rebounded better than anyone. They played a zone a lot. And when they played the zone, many times I thought there were 8 players on the court. You never got a chance to be by yourself. And when that ball was shot, I mean, they were like magnets. And I'll never forget, to this day, people remind me, when they were warming up, every one of our fans watched them because everyone could dunk. I think everyone could dunk on that team. So it was a pleasure to play against them. But my goodness, they taught us that we had a lot to learn.
Wow, those are some great names. And you hear people now when you talk about Columbus East, to this day, those are the names they talk about is Ed Ratliff and Mel No.
Oh my, a great tradition there, great tradition. And I know that, many nights I tell the kids to work extremely hard because I want you to acquire something that means the world to me. And that's memories. Man, there's not a night that goes by before closing my eyes I won't relive some of the most extraordinary memories anyone could ever have. And a lot of them dealt with my days there in Portsmouth, basketball, some of the people I've met. But that's what I want for the kids that I mentor. Work extremely hard. You can't work hard enough to develop memories that I promise will give you the greatest joys imaginable.
I agree with that. Larry, so you were 38th pick, 1965 Major League Draft. You signed out of high school, play a couple years in the minor leagues, and in 1968 you get a cup of coffee in the big leagues. But in 1969 you play a full season, finish 4th in the Rookie of the Year voting. And then you come back in 1970 and you struggled a little bit, correct? So can you kind of let me know, like, how were you dealing with that mentally and emotionally, after coming off a very good rookie season, and then you had a year, 1970, where you had a kind of a down season. But how did you start second guessing yourself or doubting yourself at that point at all?
That's one of the reasons that that was the most difficult challenge of my life. I performed probably as bad as any player in the league. And after analyzing over years what has taken place and trying to make corrections, I realized that I had lost all confidence. I remember an at-bat against Tom Seaver, who was arguably one of the best, not only then, but ever. And my goal that game was just to put the ball in play. I didn't think I'd get any base hits. And I went from playing as well as any rookie to being the absolute worst. Ultimately, I was sent to the minor leagues, which back then was the kiss of death, because there were always other players ready to take your spot. I remember going to AAA and telling myself that, Larry, you've worked too hard to get to this point. You cannot allow anything or anyone to take that dream away from you. And ultimately, I discovered about myself things that I had never known. And I don't give myself credit for much. But the one thing I give myself credit for is how I worked unrelentlessly to get myself back to the major leagues. And I used to tell myself, Larry, it's not about what happened to you, but just how you react to it. And that's how I just determined my life. If I had a bad game, the game was bad, but not as bad as how it had an effect on me. If it made me feel that I couldn't perform as well or wouldn't perform as well, that was worse than my performance. But if through training and hard work, believing in myself, that bad game motivated and inspired me to play harder, I said, Larry, now you're on your way. And I was able to make it back to the major leagues. But, man, not only make it back, and I never say anything good about myself, but before I hurt my shoulder, I could compare my results with anyone. And that pleases me beyond reason. And I use that with the young kids. I tell them, man, do me a favor. When bad things happen to you, you think about me and what I had to go through. And if I can overcome challenges, adversity, failure, you can too. And we're going to work extremely hard at doing that. Man, when I go to basketball games or a baseball game, I wish that every second the person I'm watching will be filled with nothing but positive actions, base hits, three-point shots, dunks. But I know that's not logical. I'm waiting for that mistake. I'm waiting for, during a basketball game, for one of my young men to be dribbling and the defender steals the ball from me. I'm concerned about that. More importantly, his reaction to that. Mm-hmm. If I see disappointment, hurt throughout the whole game, we have a long talk. Mm-hmm. But we talk before the game, and I tell them that anything that happens negatively, use that as a motivating force to inspire and motivate you to guarantee it won't happen again. Mm-hmm. And when those things that are difficult happens, many times, because the players know I'm going to be focused, I'll see them look up in the stands. Mm-hmm. And many times they'll give me a little signal that, Mr. Hisle, I made a mistake, but believe me, I'm going to do everything to guarantee it won't happen again. Mm-hmm. And to that point about my career, those bad years, they were horrible. And every second I played, I told the kids, it was like a dagger in my soul. But I knew that with hard work, I could change that. And when I changed it, it was the greatest thrill of my life.
Well, Larry, not only did you make it back to the big leagues, but in 1977, you hit .302 with 28 home runs, 119 RBIs, led the league, finished 12th in MVP voting. Then you come back in 1978, hit .290, 34 home runs, 115 RBIs, and finished third in the MVP voting. So you were one of the best players in the major leagues. So my next question, the adjustments you made from that time you got sent down to those 2 years in 77, 78, were the adjustments more mental or physical?
Clearly mental. You know, in 1977, my best friend in the entire world, Mr. Lyman Bostock.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Man, Earl Weaver, I have the article at home, predicted that Lyman Bostock would win between 4 and 5 batting titles in his career. I tell kids that I work with that Lyman was the greatest athlete I've ever seen in my life. Never won a batting title, never made an all-star team, wasn't the strongest, wasn't the fastest, but man, he had a will that was second to none. Tragically murdered in the prime of his life. And baseball missed out on pleasures and joys watching that young man perform that would be remembered forever. But Lyman and I used to encourage each other. And I'll never forget in 1976, at the end of the season, the Twins brought in a mental coach, and he talked about success, and he talked about the top 10%. He said, men, work hard to be in the top 10% of your league in offensive categories. And we're walking out. Lyman came over to me and said, Larry, don't pay attention to that man. He said, listen, let's you and I make it to the top 1%. Mm-hmm. And when he said that, I said, oh my goodness. And I'll never forget, we agreed that we're going to give it our best shot. And I tell the kids, it's not about what you say, but about your commitment. And it has to be the most unconditional commitment ever. Lyman Bostock, that winter, would call me 3 times every week to check on not only my progress, but his. Mm-hmm. And we motivated each other to a degree. When we walked on that field the first day of spring training, we knew that great things was going to happen. And that's what I tell the kids. With a great preparation, hard work, you can do whatever you want. And, you know, man, my key to success, and I tell the kids, I had a philosophy that I wanted to attempt to be the most consistent player in the game. Because in my little personal definition of success, you know, greatness is just being consistently good a lot.
Mm-hmm. Right.
I'm not overly impressed with the 4 home run games and the 8 or 9 RBIs. That's great. But I tell the kids, I'm impressed, young man, when you're 0 for 4 and that last at bat, you go up there, you give it your best effort. There's a man on second base, you get that base hit. Mm-hmm. That impresses me. And that was my goal. You know, man, to do a little bit of everything. I wanted to steal bases. I wanted to move runners. I wanted to hit for an average. I wanted to drive in runs. I wanted to score runs. But I wanted to do a lot of things that were not considered the elite very well. And I felt if I could do that, my name would be mentioned with the best.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, Larry, you finished your career 14 seasons in the major leagues. I know you had some injuries that probably cut your career short. Can you talk a little bit about the mental and emotional side of dealing with injuries and what, in your case, ended up being a career-ending injury?
You know, that last year actually my first year with Milwaukee, where I was lucky enough to be third in that MVP balloting A friend asked me, he said, Larry, can you do any better than that? And I tell the kids about that. I said, my answer was, men, we can always do better. And I said, I will do better. Man, that winter I worked harder than ever before. And my goal was to improve upon what I did when I came in third place. The two people that finished ahead of me, outstanding players, Jim Rice, and boy, I'm showing my age, the pitcher with, they call him the Louisiana Raging. Boy, I'm showing
Ron Guidry?
Guidry, Yankees.
Ron Guidry.
Yes. He finished, up in there. None of them had a year like they did there. Had they had their regular year, I would have won that MVP vote. I said, Larry, you got to do it. I got off to the absolute best start of my career. And I'll never forget in Baltimore, making a throw near the end of April, I could feel a sharp pain in my shoulder. And I told the trainer, I said, listen, if the game depends upon me making a throw to throw someone out, I won't be able to do it. And they took me out of the game. The doctor from the Orioles came over and looked at me and said, you should go home and have your team physician examine you. And that was basically the end of my career. I had 2 surgeries. I think I probably averaged maybe 20 at-bats for the next 3 years after that, and then had to retire. During the period where, honestly, I was playing the absolute best baseball of my life. And what was important, I wanted a career that people would be able to look back and say that at one time he performed where he was the lowest of the low. But through hard work and effort, he was able to regain all that he had wanted to in terms of performance and attitude, and be able to be mentioned with the best of the best.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think you definitely did that, in my opinion.
Oh, well, thank you.
So you get into coaching, and you win a World Series title in 1992, 1993 with Toronto Blue Jays, and had 3 people with connections to Portsmouth, Ohio on that staff, if I'm not mistaken, yourself, Gene Tennis, and World Series MVP Pat Borders.
Yeah.
So as a hitting coach, what do you think your strength was? Was it more mechanical, or was it more the mental side of hitting, or a little bit of both?
Somewhat of both. The veteran players, which we had a number, most, like I did when I was a veteran, had established a procedure in which they would follow to guarantee success. It was with those younger players that I spent most of my time, because not only did I have to work on them with their technique, but that mental part of the game was so important. And it was truly a pleasure and honor. And many of the problems that I experienced, I knew would be helpful in helping those players. We had a young catcher. And again, I'm showing my age. I have to apologize. He's probably about 22 when he came up. We were in Milwaukee, my old city, and the young man had a horrible game in every way imaginable. I remember the manager was upset with the way he called the game. He would holler out, and after a pitch to the young man, when he came into the dugout, he would get on him. Offensively, had a horrible game. And I'll never forget, the game ended, and everyone came up, got a quick bite to eat, changed, showered, getting ready to leave. And when most people were in the shower, he just went to his locker and he turned the chair around and pushed it way into the locker where you could only see the back of his head. I knew that he needed something to be said. I walked over to him, tapped him on the back. He turned around, tears flowing from both eyes like he was 2 years old and just received a spanking. I'll never forget saying, "Young man, I know it was tough, and I know that you're having feelings that you're the lowest of the low." I said, "I've been there many, many times. But the good thing is, young man, we're going to change this." And I'll never forget, I said, "Tomorrow, I want you to come to the ballpark at noon. I'll be right here waiting for you. And we're going to talk, and we're going to work, and we're going to correct every problem that took place. But I said, I want you to do me a favor tonight. When you're in that bed and you're thinking about that game, think about all the players that have had difficulties in this game. And what they ultimately, the great ones, were being judged by and defined by is how they performed in those tough times." And I said, "Young man, I promise, when your career is over and they think about tough times and how people performed, they're going to be thinking about you first." And he left and came back yesterday, the next day at 12 o'clock. And we had a lot of work and a lot of talking. But those experiences that, especially negative ones that took place in my career, I mean, really paid off because I was able to give advice that I certainly would not have been able to give had not I failed. Mm-hmm. So it was truly a pleasure. But those 2 years were magical. My goodness. The hardest working, most competitive group of athletes I have ever been around in my life. And it was a pleasure to come to the ballpark each and every day.
And I just want to add, in 1993, you were the hitting coach, and your players, John Olerud, Paul Molitor, and Roberto Alomar, finished 1, 2, 3 in the American League batting average.
That was a joy. All three were just great. But we had other players that performed in ways that were equally as enjoyable. Our 25th year anniversary, they invited everybody back to Toronto. And I took my family. My grandson was probably about 8 years old. We were in a room together with all the players, and I took a lot of pictures. I love photography. And I told my grandson, probably never in your life or in the lives of anyone will they be in a room with so many dynamic and outstanding players. Now, there were 5 players who made the Hall of Fame, other players who were the Defensive Player of the Year awards. We had base stealers. I mean, it was just phenomenal. And he enjoyed that more than I did. But it was a true joy. And that team has given me memories that will last a lifetime.
So your grandson, is that Jax?
Yes, that's Jax.
So, just signed or committed with the University of Louisville, correct?
He did. And again, I'm smiling. That young man, other than my son, it was watching him was something I couldn't believe. My son's probably about 6'4", maybe 6'5", and every year that he competed in every sport, he was the tallest, biggest player on the team.
Mm-hmm.
My grandson was just the opposite. He was always smallest on the team. I couldn't believe it. I go out there, and I know my son has told me about it, but I remember seeing it when my grandson was a junior. He was 5 feet 7 inches tall, weighed 140 pounds. And from his junior to his senior year, he grew to 6'2". Now he weighs about, I think, 210, and just the most delightful young man. I know I'm sounding biased to be around. He did something in high school that I was never prouder of him in my life. He started to work out before school started at 5:30 in the morning. And I said, Jack, that shows a commitment that is needed to become the absolute best you can be. And I said, I guarantee that when other players hear about what you're doing, irregardless of the sport, they're going to join you. There'll be football players practicing with you, basketball players, volleyball players. And he worked extremely hard. And, man, I'll make another statement that's going to sound biased, but it's the truth. I mentor kids and been mentoring kids my entire life. As a matter of fact, I'm smiling. They did an article on me probably 15 years ago. They said, Larry, we want to know the first person you ever mentored. And both of you know this gentleman well. Matter of fact, he gave me your number. They called, and I gave him his number, Mr. Brady Womack. And I remember working with Brady, coaching his team. One of the most enjoyable people I've ever been around. But my grandson, working with him, of all the people I've ever worked with, he's the kindest, most compassionate, caring person I've ever been around. And I told him, I said, Jax, never change. Many of young people I mentor in the inner city of Milwaukee, it takes me a little while, but they take kindness as a weakness. Mm-hmm. And I told my grandson, I said, nothing could be further from the truth, what they think. And I said, you don't have to worry about that. I said, because being 6'3", big as you are, they won't believe me. They won't take your kindness for weakness. Mm-hmm. But he gives me great joy. He works extremely hard. He's on the dean's list. And I've never been a Louisville supporter at all, but I'm going to be their biggest supporter starting today.
No doubt.
Gene, if I'm not mistaken, wasn't Larry Jr. and Jackson Portsmouth
yes.
a couple of years ago, and we met your son and Jax.
Yes.
And just two fine human beings. I watched him hitting the cage, and I was like, this he has it, The ball came off his bat a little different. So I'm not surprised about the commitment to Louisville. Not surprised at all.
Oh, thank you. It was one of the schools that he, I guess, forever wanted to go to. And he told me about the trip there, and it was truly, truly joyful. He also was recruited by Ohio State. He made a trip to Ohio State.
Okay.
And I have a friend who was a writer for the Buckeyes who invited me, my son and grandson to Ohio State. And it had to be at least 10 years ago. One of the most memorable trips. We went up. He gave all of us a tour of the football facility. Then we went over to the baseball field, and the gate was open to the field. We walked in, and my little grandson sat in the dugout. I took some pictures. Then he ran around the bases. It was truly a joy. And then we went to the basketball practice where the team was practicing. The coach came over to us, talked to us about 10 minutes. And then when they had a break, every one of the players came over. and talked to us, and I took pictures of some of the players and my grandson. But I told him I was extremely proud that the school that I received a scholarship from was interested in him.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. Well, Larry, I only have one more question for you. Then I'm going to see if Gene has anything to ask you. But do you believe you could have played in the NBA?
Well, my little grandson used to ask, and my son did too. A great question. I don't know. I told them, but what I do know, I probably wouldn't have bet against myself. There's nothing special about me, but I love challenges. And I know that had I gone to Ohio State, my goal would have been to improve every year and to be able to compete with the absolute best. Now, I used to watch pro basketball and watch the guards and try to convince myself or ask myself, Larry, do you think you could compete against that player or that player? And I was blessed with skills that I truly didn't deserve, but I felt on the skill level, I could compete with them. And ultimately, I felt it would just boil down to just how important it would have been for me. And knowing myself, I would have given it every ounce of energy to have attempted to play. I'm not a betting man, and I've never said this before, if I had to bet one way or another, I probably would have bet that I would have made it. And I hope that doesn't sound like I'm bragging or anything, but I just love work. I love working.
I would have bet you made it as well.
Oh, thank you.
There's no doubt. Now, if you would have played basketball, now you played in the post in high school, is that right?
I'm sorry, what was that, Eugene?
Did you play in the post when you were in high school? Was you a post player?
I did, but my senior year, Coach Heller did let me play guard at times.
Okay.
So I was able to have that experience. Anytime there was a press, he would allow me to bring the ball down.
Okay.
So I did have some of those opportunities, and I know there were certain plays designed for me where he would have me work on the player one-on-one, and I would start outside. So I had some time to spend at the guard position, but not as much as I would have loved to have had, though.
Mm-hmm. Question is kind of off the subject, but so when you were in Milwaukee, were you in Milwaukee during the time that Al McGuire was the coach in Marquette?
I came the next year that, he had retired. The year when they won the championship, I was in Minnesota. And, usually that's a crazy story, too, because when I was being recruited in 77 at the end of the season by the Brewers, my son was at an age where he knew about baseball. He was only 6, but he'd go to game, knew his teams. And I remember I had a meeting with my wife and son, and I said, your father has to make a decision that will impact everyone in our family. And everyone gets a decision on what and where you want me to play. Mm-hmm. And I'll never forget, I said, Larry, do you have any special places? And like all young kids, number 1 was the Yankees.
Right.
Number 2 was the Dodgers. Milwaukee wasn't even mentioned. Mm-hmm. We took a number of trips to Milwaukee. And on the first trip, the owner of the team told my son, he said, Larry Jr., if you can convince your father to come here, there are things that I can do for you that no other kid would be able to say could happen to them. He said, to start off with, if you come back, I'll enable you to sit on the Marquette bench during the game.
Okay.
And he said, if you could convince your father to come, any game you want to come to, you'll be able to sit on the bench and go to practices. After that, Milwaukee was number one on the list. And that's right. And when we went to their 77, Al McGuire had left.
Okay.
But, we came back, went to a game. They let my son sit on the bench. The next year, during the games, he sit on the bench. At halftime, they would allow me and my son to sit in on the speeches and everything.
Okay.
There were a couple of times, though, a coach came up to me and said, Larry, listen, you can come in, but it probably would be a good idea if you leave your son out, because I'm going to say some things you would want him to hear. So I just kept my son out. And Al McGuire. And I'm showing my age. I can't remember the coach's name. He played minor league baseball and was a wonderful man. I would help Marquette recruit. So Marquette played a big part in my reason for coming to Milwaukee.
Would it have been Hank Raymond's? Does that sound right?
Yes. I don't know how I forgot that, but yeah, Hank played baseball. The greatest man. He gave me and my son opportunities that were just second to none. Like all the practices, we could go into the locker room. We knew all the players. Oh yeah, Hank Raymond's. Yeah, it was a joy for me. Truly a joy.
Hank recruited a kid from Willisburg
Paul
who went to Marquette.
Paul Newman, wasn't it?
Coach.
Was that Paul Newman?
Paul Newman, yes.
Yeah. Played with Doc Rivers.
Yes. Yeah.
I remember that. As a matter of fact, I contacted a young man. I said that I've got to have him over to the house. I was just so excited, that someone close to Portsmouth went there, but I know he didn't stay there real long. And
right.
I never got the chance to, get him to my home. But I was so excited that he was able to spend time at Marquette.
Mm-hmm. Of course, I'm kind of like a history buff, and it's kind of interesting. But one of the names that comes to mind, and I was going to ask you, did you ever face Denny McClain from Detroit?
Oh, yes. I have to admit, that year in 1968, Denny McClain was probably the reason I made the team. I'll never forget, man, in 68, I was 20 years old. The year before, I played Class A ball. And Gene Malk was the manager. Gene believed in what I loved, preparation. I used to tell my son and the kids I work with, I said, practice is great. Get as much out of it as you can. But there's not enough coaches for everyone to receive the attention on their needs that's necessary. So in order to improve, you've got to either work before or after or both. And I was the one who always wanted to get that extra in. So I would come to practice early, found out I didn't get there earlier than Gene Malk. Mm-hmm. Gene saw me out there. Gene would come out there every day to help. And he gave me an opportunity to play more than I deserved. And I'll never forget, one game I hit 2 home runs. Another game I hit 2. But clearly the thing that got me there, it was near the end, and Denny McClain was pitching. And I probably hit one of the furthest home runs I've ever hit in my life against him. And I think because of that made me become a member of that team.
Okay.
He was great, but there were just so many great pitchers that when people talk about the game, they'll bring up pitchers that I competed against and had the true pleasure of saying that they were a part of my career.
Mm-hmm.
How about Nolan Ryan? What was it like facing Nolan Ryan, or did you ever face Nolan Ryan?
Oh my goodness. Man, I'll never forget when I was coaching Mr. Nolan Ryan. I had retired coaching the minor leagues, went to the ballpark one day, and one of the players said, minor league player said, "Coach, your name's in the newspaper." I said, "What? You can't." I said, "No." He said, "Coach, it is." He went and got the article, showed it to me. It wasn't because of anything I did, but Nolan Ryan had just struck out his 5,000th batter. They had a list not only of every player that he struck out, but the number of times. I believe I was like fifth on that list. I had the unlucky joy of starting with him in the National League, then going to the American League, and he went there the same year I did. But you know, men, the greatest compliment I ever received was from Nolan Ryan. 1977, Minnesota, he was pitching. We beat him 2-1. I hit a home run, drove in the second run with a bunt, base hit. Last play of the game, I made a diving catch. And in the article the next day, at the top of the article, there was bold print of something our manager said. He said that manager said, Larry can beat you in a number of different ways, with the bunt, base hit, defense, base running. And then below that in bold print was a comment that Nolan Ryan made. And I'll never forget it. I have the article. Nolan said that I was the best player in baseball. Wow. And he said, no one can do more things to help his team win than Larry. Mm. And it was the greatest compliment, but it just emphasized what I attempted to do. Right. I attempted to do everything to help our team win. And that's what I tell players. I said, man, the home run, the 3-point shot, that is wonderful. But I want to see consistency. I want to see you move that runner. I want to see you rebound well. I want to see you handle that ball well. Those little things that make the difference in winning and losing. That's what I want you to master. And that's what I attempted to do. And when Nolan Ryan said that again, I believe that what I had worked for became my reality.
Yeah, that's a strong statement by one of the best pitchers to ever do it. One of the best.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much.
Gene, you got anything else?
Oh, we could talk forever, but no, some of the things that I had in my mind that I just wanted to ask while I had the chance.
Oh, man. And I want to thank you. This has been truly a pleasure. And I can't wait to get your book. Like I said, I know I'm going to buy some more because I'm going to be giving them to the young men I work with. But I can make you one promise. You two in that book will be well known in Milwaukee.
Oh, wow. Thank you. Thank you, Larry. Larry, I just want to say that you're a legend in Portsmouth. You're still talked about all the time. There's a debate whether your best sport was baseball or basketball. But the one thing that has not been debatable, that you are one of the kindest, most humble people that I've ever met. And anybody I talk to that's met you and knows you says the same thing. So just thank you for being such a great role model and just a great human being.
Absolutely.
Oh, man, I want to thank you for those kind words. Like I mentioned, I'm the luckiest man ever to be born, to grow up as an orphan with no brothers, no sisters, lived in the housing projects. And at the end, to be the happiest person alive is truly a joy. And like I mentioned, I remember saying that my mother was responsible. I think about her a lot. When my son was born, I remember telling myself, would my mother think that I am the right person to raise my son? And should I raise him to be like myself? So she always kept me on my toes. And growing up in Portsmouth, it was a privilege because people always recognized when people were working hard and gave me that pat on the back and encouragement to just be my absolute best.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Larry, thank you again for joining us. A lot of great stuff. I'm very excited for our listeners to check out this episode. And to all of our listeners out there, we just ask that you would check out our website, checkupneckup.com. That's neck up with a K, because we want to give you the knowledge from the neck up. And please follow our YouTube channel at Neck Up Live. And that is, again, neck up with a K, because we want to give you the knowledge. We think that the mental and emotional side is oftentimes a difference maker between your success and failures. So please follow us. And again, check out this latest episode with Mr. Larry Hisle. Larry, thank you again. And it's been such a joy and a pleasure to spend this last hour with you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, Larry. Take care.
Oh,
Thank
you
you
as well.
Mm.